Hey guys, welcome back to my YouTube channel and welcome to episode 1 of Touchy Feely. I guess that's the name I'm going to go with. So basically the idea for these videos came around from watching those kind of get ready with me chatty vlogs from beauty vloggers that I am often exposed to from sitting watching YouTube with Helen. And I thought, I always wondered how I could do that with photography. Well, instead of doing makeup, obviously, I could maybe retouch a picture and chat through some of the things that are on my mind and might be on the mind of other photographers and freelancers or people in creative industry or in daily life. Today I'm going to retouch an image of Anthony Ogogo, which is shot in summer last year, and chat about something that a lot of us have to deal with, which is how to deal with rejection. Let's hit screen record and get into it. I hope you enjoy. Let me know in the comments your thoughts and be sure to subscribe. So this is the raw image. I've already done a grade for these and I'm just going to use that. You can see how little of an adjustment I've done on the left here to the contrast, brightness and saturation. I've warmed it up a little bit, but it's pretty much as it was shot. The dynamic range, I've saved the highlights and brought up the shadows a little bit just to bring in these dark areas. You'll see I'm going to basically apply this filter onto this image here. Then if we go to the levels, I've taken the blues into the shadows a little bit. At that time of day, when the sun is rising, the shadows are quite blue and quite cold. Not done anything to the green, made the highlights a little bit red just to add a little bit of warmth there. Because we're dealing with that backlit, the mid-tones and the shadows are going to be really dark. So I've brought the mid-tones up a little bit, nipped the highlights a little bit and made the darks a little darker. We've got a small curve on there. Nothing in clarity, nothing in vignette. And that is pretty much it. This is it raw, this is it with the filter. I'm going to go up here to the top right, copy that filter, paste it onto this image here, and bosh. There we are. Which image should I retouch? This one or this one? I really like this one. This is actually quite nice and I like that flare, so we could maybe add a little bit there. Let's go with this one. I'm going to go over here and I'm going to export the TIFF. Okay, and here we are in Photoshop. So basically we watch these videos, Helen and I, these sit down makeup things where they just talk about their day and talk about things that are on their mind. And if I'm honest, I kind of get into them a little bit. It's quite interesting to watch and just, I've always wondered, like, what's the photography equivalent that I could do? So here we are. I can retouch and just chat about things that might be affecting myself or other freelancers. So one of the main things that I do in Photoshop is inverted layers. So let's go with the curves there, okay? So I basically do a high and I do a low, okay? So if Photoshop doesn't automatically pop this masking layer onto it, it's just this button down here, the rectangle with the little square missing. So as you can see, it's really messed up the picture, but if you press Command I on both of these, it hides it. You'll need to select the rubber and basically rub in that layer. So don't have the opacity and flow too high, because otherwise it'll be a bit too crass. But let's start at 30% here, which is a little higher than I would normally start, but it'll give you an idea. So as we can see, it's backlit. The shadows are really dark and we maybe want to bring that out a little bit. So I'm going to press Z to zoom in. So I've got my rubber here. So what I look for is where there is already light. I just want to enhance that a little bit. So I'm going to undo that because that's a bit harsh, like I said. And I'll go to 20% and 20%. Dealing with rejection. It's something that you kind of have to get used to as a freelancer, as a photographer, and I'm only saying as a freelancer and photographer because that's my experience, but you probably have to deal with rejection a lot in life. Everybody in all walks of life faces rejection at some point. Personally, as a photographer, rejection is almost a daily occurrence and it just comes with the territory. As a photographer, you are putting a frame around something and you're basically saying, look at this, I think this is good, this is worth talking about. Look at this picture of Anthony boxing, this is worth talking about. Look at the thing I did. You are putting yourself out there. Initially, when you start doing that, you probably get support from friends and family and they say, oh yeah, Rich, those pictures are really nice. But the more that you show your pictures to people who maybe don't have, an ulterior motive for telling you that things are good, maybe the people who aren't close to you in day-to-day life, the more you're going to run into rejection, the more people are going to be like, well, actually, that picture's a bit crap, Rich. And initially, that can be so demoralizing. You might be entering your pictures into competitions. You might be trying to get commissions. So initially it's demoralizing, but you have to grow a thick skin because it's going to happen a lot for possibly the rest of your life. Even the most successful photographers are getting rejected all the time. It's the equivalent of that Michael Jordan quote where they're saying, you know, Michael Jordan has missed 9,000 shots. Emailing someone and asking for work is the equivalent of taking a shot. So you need to grow that thick skin. Okay, so I've worked into this a little bit. I'm just going around the highlights and I've done this a bit, shall we say, crasser than, if that's a word, than I normally would. But if I toggle the layer on and off, you can see I've used the highlight to accentuate Anthony's muscles and anywhere else where there might be a highlight. This is basically adding contrast in a specific area, rather than just getting this brightness and contrast layer and going bosh contrast, which is going to add contrast to the whole thing. I would just use an inverted curves layer, and that is our low. And I'm going to leave that as it is whilst I go to the low layer, and anywhere where there's shadows, so maybe the shirt is a good place to start. I'll go back in, I'll get my rubber, I will just go around some of the dark parts, and as we can see, it's really adding some nice contrast there to the creases and curves of Anthony's shirt. Helps add a bit of a dramatic effect. Little details like even the contrast in the clothing can help bring alive the movement in your subject. Okay, and then we'll go back to Anthony's arms here, and I'm just going to use a bigger rubber here. So yeah, dealing with rejection, you have to grow a thick skin. And what I found has worked really well for me over the years is really coming to terms with the fact of how unlikely it is for you to email a potential client and for them to be sitting there ready and waiting, not just for a photographer, but for a photographer who shoots the way you shoot in the style that you shoot. So I've actually had a few instances where I've emailed people. If you've watched last week's vlog where I went and shot some Manchester United players, I emailed the agency that hired me, I emailed them, and they were actively thinking about hiring a photographer for this project. Because they're mainly a film company, they do film first and then they're like, oh, let's get a stills guy on board. The chances of all those stars aligning, of me going through my old emails because they're a previous client and thinking, I'm going to email them. They're going to receive that email at that specific time where they're thinking about getting a photographer and thinking, yeah, we've worked with Rich before, this is perfect, let's get him on board. The chances of that happening are so slim. And when you come to terms with the unlikelihood of that, you realize that, yeah, you are probably in for a lot of rejections, just because it's a matter of timing. And the more emails and the more you reach out to people, the more you do that, the more likely you are to arrive at those situations where it's like, yeah, you're hired. So I'm adding shadows to help add a little bit of definition. We're going to zoom out and we've done our highs and lows there. That is horrendous. It's far too harsh. But what I'll do is I will shift click on both of these, Command G to group. So we've got our highs and lows there. I will bring down the fill on both of these quite a bit because I've been quite harsh here. Off and on, yeah. Okay, it's still a little bit harsh for my liking. I'll take down the opacity a little bit. Boom, there we go. You can see it's just bringing it out a little bit. I'm not so keen on what's going on his arms there with the highlights. It's a bit too obvious. Select my high layer, rubber, I'll get yeah, this is quite big, this one, and I'll just feather in that highlight a little bit. You see? So it's not so obvious. It doesn't look like a Street Fighter character now. Generally, take the highlight over there. So what are we saying here? Yeah, there we go, a little bit of definition. And you can use this for anything. You can use this for beauty retouching if you want to add a little bit of contrast, lighten up the eyes and everything. I do also use a technique, frequency separation. There's a ton of videos on frequency separation on YouTube, so go check those out. Next, I'm going to enhance this flare that we see here. So, new layer, I'm going to use my brush, and this is maybe a bit too big, 2500, I'm going to go to 1500, bosh, there we are. And I'm going to make sure my brush is white, and we're at 100, so boom, 1, and I'm going to duplicate that, and then I'm going to transform the top one, hold down Option so it increases in size from the center, and then I'm going to get a hue and saturation layer, click Colorize, create this sort of warm hue. We don't want it too obvious, so bring the saturation down. We want it subtle, subtle, subtle. So you'll see what I'm doing. So you've got a hue and saturation above both of these layers that you've just created with the brush, and when you hold down Option, you can apply those layers to them. I like to then group these and transform. So we can see the sunshine is coming from the top left here, and basically that's what we want to enhance. That's why I've made the hue and saturation layer a similar color, but now we've applied it to this brush layer. We can't quite see it yet, but we'll get to that, we can bring it in. So I'm going to bring it over here, and I'm going to do a distort transform, so I can drag my layer over and you will begin to see what I'm getting at here. And we're just enhancing it a little bit. So this is still a bit too harsh, but I'm going to bring down my fill in a second. The reason I do fill instead of opacity, fill reacts differently to the shadows. The shadows and contrast stay prominent, whereas with opacity, everything just kind of comes down a little bit and it's not quite as nice. I'm sure there's a far more technical explanation to that. So over time, you'll start to build this thick skin with rejection. And it might surprise people how often you get rejected as a photographer. This is quite a weird thing to say because you don't want to admit to being rejected all the time, but here we are. I'll turn this to a linear dodge ad. I don't know why. I watched it in a YouTube tutorial and it's just always what I do now. But you can see that orange is starting to come through a little bit more. So we have the lower of the brush layers, which is smaller, so it's going to be harsher. So the more you take the fill down, the more obvious that's going to be. And I can bring out the hue, I can bring out the color in that a bit more. If I really pop the saturation up here just to show you guys and put the lightness down, you can really see it going orange there. We don't want it that harsh. Retouching is all about doing things tastefully, but this orange almost looks fake, so I do want to tame that a little bit. But I'm going to bring down the fill quite a lot in these, so it's still coming through quite a bit. Okay, there we are. Does that make things better or worse? I'm not sure, but there you see the flare technique that I use in a lot of my pictures. It might not even need to be used in this one. Right, what I'm going to do here with this flare layer, shall we say, we'll call this flare. I'm going to duplicate this and I'm going to transform it and I'm going to flip it horizontal and I'm going to flip it vertical because I'm going to put it in this opposite corner over here. So it just brings the brightness up in this other corner here. I know that's not how the light would naturally be. So we're editing out the blemishes here with the patch tool. For me, when I'm retouching, it's all about distractions. And that goes for when you are retouching anything on someone's skin or when you're retouching things in the background, because I want the focus to be on Anthony here. So here we go, I'll pop all these layers on again, and if we group everything from the very start and toggle it off and on, you know, I'm not actually sure that that looks better, but here we are. Say I'd done all the retouching that I'd wanted to do here. What I would do is put things in a group, as you can see here, in group 2, and I will Command J and duplicate that. So then I can Command E and it'll flatten all those layers. I'll get rid of group 2, so we can toggle off and on, and we've just got 2 layers effectively now. And then what I will do is Command J, filter, other, and high pass. This is a great way of sharpening your image tastefully. I do a radius of about 8, and I usually use a soft light. You can see the difference if I toggle through hard light, vivid light. You're getting like, you know, when you first find the sharpen tool here and you just think, yeah, sharpen tool. What I do is soft light, and I'll usually put the fill somewhere between 70 and 80. Now, it's all these little subtleties that make a big difference. One other thing that I might do is I'll hold the Option button down and I'll go to New Layer, and I'll go to Overlay and Fill with Overlay Neutral Color, 50% grey. Boom. And that does this. You can see here it's a grey layer, but because it's an overlay you can't see it, but you can apply filters to it to apply a little bit of grain. Noise, add noise, about 14. Just add a nice little bit of texture. I like that little bit of texture. I don't want it to look like it's noisy, I just want it to have a little thing. F and F to do that big thing to make it full screen. And I like that image, I do, I've got to say. I hope that kind of helps. Thanks for watching this pilot episode of Retouchy Feely. Please give me any feedback and how you think I could have done things differently or better. There'll be plenty more videos like this and behind the scenes videos and weekly vlogs, so be sure to hit subscribe, and I will hopefully see you on the next video. Bye bye.